So the customer's always right, are they? Imagine this situation. A guy walks into the bar, he's had a terrible, crappy day, and he's just ready to just unload on the next person he sees. He sits down at the bar and just slumps his shoulders and he says, "I'll have a beer, thanks." Barman pours this guy a beer, this nice tall glass and nice froth on top, and it's just got the dew just condensing down on the side of it. He's just about to grab it, and his phone rings. He looks at the phone and he says, "Ugh." So he grabs the phone and he starts on the phone and he's doing the nodding, and then as he's getting more and more agitated, and then what he does is he gets up from his chair and he starts walking up and down the bar, and he starts walking outside into the foyer, and you know the look, the whole thing of like you're doing this thing and yeah, and the arms are waving like mine do most of the time. And he comes back into the bar about 5 minutes later. He sits himself back down on the bench, his shoulders a little bit more drooped than they were before, and he looks down at his beer and the beer's gone flat. It's also not as cold as it was when he first got it. He says to the barman after he calls him over and says, "Hey, look, my beer's gone flat." The barman says, "Well, it wasn't flat when I poured it for you 5 minutes ago." And the little argument ensues from that. Who's right? Who's wrong? The beer was actually poured correctly at the time it was ordered. It happens to have been the customer's fault that the customer let it go flat. Now, the customer wants a free beer, wants a replacement. The customer is wrong. You can't say the customer is always right. I think what people mean by that when they say it is not that the customer is always right, but that the customer will always win the argument. They're very, very, very different things. And the difference comes out in how you communicate with staff. If your staff believe that the customer, if you go to your staff and say to them the customer is always right, they're not going to believe you, and they're going to think, well, hang on a second, you're not sticking up for me at all in this situation, because sometimes customers are a plain old pain. So what do you do there? You say to the staff, "Hey, we know the customer's not always right, but they'll always win the argument." Now, of course, that does not include if the customer is being abusive. It doesn't include if the customer is being completely preposterous, like they took a flight on an airplane and the flight was bumpy and they want a refund because the flight was too bumpy. Naturally, it's not those extreme situations. But usually when it's these little events where who's right, who's wrong, let's err on the side of the customer is going to probably get away with the argument, and let them get away with the argument, because they will just win the argument simply by the fact that they can pick up their 2 feet and go elsewhere. The most important thing is that your staff members know that you know reality, that you know that the customers are not always right, but that you are prepared to let the customer win the argument. If you are prepared to let the customer win the argument as a leader of the organization, then your staff will more than happily let the customer win the argument, and everyone is better off.